In today's lecture, we're going to cover two critical topics. Firstly, understanding the LCAT format completely. Because before every test that you ever take in your life, one thing that you have to firstly make sure of is the fact that you understand the format and the type of questions that you might get. So, today we're going to firstly discuss the structure of the standardized test by LUMS, and after that, we're going to discuss some basic timing strategies and then some intro and kind of like a review of the question types. So, let's dive in. First, let me give you a big picture of what LCAT actually is. So, LCAT stands for LUMS Common Admission Test. It is an aptitude test that LUMS creates as an alternative to SAT. Now, some of you might be wondering, why would LUMS make their own test? Well, especially after COVID, when SAT centers were closing and students couldn't take the SAT, LUMS introduced LCAT to give students more opportunities. Now, here's what you need to know. LCAT is very similar to the SAT in format, but there are some key differences. The math section in LCAT is actually harder because they sometimes include concepts from A levels or FSE. However, this is a good news for us that the English section is considered slightly easier than SAT. Now, LCAT is not a curriculum based test. This means that they won't ask you about your metric or A levels and O levels syllabus. Instead, it is an aptitude test that measures your reasoning abilities, your comprehension skills, and vocabulary knowledge. So the test is completely multiple choice. And just like SAT, there is no negative marking. So you can always guess if you don't know the answer. We'll talk more about strategies and other tips of actually acing the test in later videos. But today, let's talk about the exact breakdown of the LCAT structure. This is really important to understand because it will help you manage your time and energy on the test day. So, as you can see on my screen, this LCAT has two major sections, that of English and Maths. So there are further two subsections for English and Maths. So in total, you'll be getting 4 sections in the entire test. So in the English portion, per section, you will have 25 questions. Within the 25 questions, 14 of them would be from long passages. So these could include questions about different themes that we're going to discuss, and you can have up to 2 long passages. This can sometimes go to 3 and 4, and each passage is about 4 pages long. So you'll have to work on your reading comprehension and also speed to be able to tackle all the questions in time and correctly. Okay, so the major themes, I'm just going to give you a small highlight over here, and we're going to discuss this later in this video. There will be literature and arts, humanities and social sciences, science, and other contemporary issues. So let's look at the other 11 questions that you would have from the short passages. Now, these questions would cover grammar and the writing portion. So just like the digital SAT or the college board tests, you'll be having small questions that are specifically based on these major areas of focus: vocabulary, grammar rules, and standard English conventions. We're going to talk about and dive into this deeper in the upcoming videos. This can be on a longer end because the passages, although called short passages, can be over 10 lines or more. So there are some major skills that you'll have to work on to be able to ace the English test overall. So now we're going to talk about the question types that you can expect to come on your LCAT test. The first one being that of sentence completion. Now, we can understand this through an example. As you can see, the professor's lecture was so deep that even the most attentive students struggled to focus. Now, this is a very simple example, but just for understanding the question, I'm using it over here. So, it is the sort of idea that through the given sentence, you'll have to analyze and understand which option is the most suitable one for the given sentence. So, in other words, you'll have to complete the sentence by the context that is given to you. Now, in this question, the professor's lecture was so dense that even the most attentive students struggled to focus. We can see that engaging, brief, and profound do not make sense. So, the only option that fits the context the most is tedious, which in other words mean boring. So, this is a kind of question that you might get on your paper. Now let's look at the other one. Next question is that of reading comprehension. So over here you'll be having questions about the main idea, about specific details in a given passage or in a given short paragraph, about the purpose or the tone of the speaker in the passage, and again, words in context, inference, and conclusion questions. So, one thing that you have to understand, and I'm going to emphasize on this again and again, is the importance of reading strategically. Now, you can read a given passage about 5 to 6 times, but if you don't understand these major points, you won't be able to answer quickly. So, the next part, kind of question type that you might get, is about grammar and writing. So, within grammar and writing, there are certain subtopics that, if you focus on separately, you can easily pass the grammar portion because it is just a set of rules and some practice questions that give you the overall idea of how to navigate this portion. This can include questions on punctuation, about the proper placement of a comma or a semicolon, or about the proper usage of a transition word, where to put this colon or the semicolon around the transition word. So these are proper questions about the punctuation part. Next, there will be questions based on subject-verb agreement, verb tense consistency, and parallel structure. So these are some very narrowly picked topics. However, there can be further other subtopics that we'll discuss in a later video about the grammar and writing portion. Now, the first and the most important thing about the reading section, and it is something that a lot of students actually struggle with, is the long passages that you get on the test and the kind of questions that you have to derive from the test itself. So what can you expect on the test day? Here's something helpful to know. LCAT passages, just like the SAT, tend to follow certain themes. Now, let me tell you what topics commonly appear so you're not surprised on the test day. So, there will be science passages, literature and arts, and historical passages, and further many other topics that we will discuss later on. So, you'll definitely see at least one science passage. Now, this might be about climate change and environmental science, biology, topics like genetics, evolution, ecosystem, physics or chemistry concepts explained for general readers, or topics about technology, innovation, and other contemporary sciences, and about medical or health related topics. Now, for example, you might read a passage about climate change. It mentions how climate change affects oceanic temperatures, about the development of renewable energy, or about how human immune system works in general. So don't worry, you don't need to be a science expert. These passages are written for general audiences, and all the information that you need to answer the questions is within the passage. So although your previous knowledge of science would help you to understand the passage a bit better, it will not help you answer the questions directly. Assume that you're not reading the passage at all. So, other one would include literature and arts or humanities and social sciences. So, these passages would discuss human behavior, society, culture, and other common themes would be literary movements, how art reflects society, evolution, about anthropology, and other historical essays like philosophical, political essays, speeches by historical figures, and accounts of historical events. You might read about women's rights movements or others, how social media affects mental health, or about how economic development in developing countries is being tackled. So there could be topics about how poetry of romantic era reflected political changes, or about how modern novelists use different narrative techniques. So there is a plethora of topics that you can expect to come on the LCAT English portion. These can be tricky because the language style is different from what you read every day, but you just have to remember one thing, and that is to read carefully and focus on the understanding on the main ideas. Alright, so now you understand the complete LCAT format, the different sections. As a quick summary, let's go through them again. You'll be having a total of 4 sections where there will be 2 sections each of English and Maths. You know that there will be major of 2 main sections within the English part as well. The first one being that of reading, and the other one that of writing and grammar portion. I've also discussed some types of passages you might expect, and that there's no negative marking. So you should always attempt every question. Okay, so this ends our first session on the LCAT overview. In the next lecture, we will tackle vocabulary, which is one of the most daunting parts of LCAT. Allah Hafiz.